Okay, but was she a lesbian or not? I recently released a video about the incredible Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz, the 17th century nun from New Spain, often called the Phoenix of America, but also known as the worst nun in history because she once signed a letter as I, the worst of all. She dared to think, write, and question the world around her, arguing that women should have the right to an education, which got her a lot of praise, but also a lot of criticism. There's so much that could be said about Sor Juana. In the comments, several of you pointed out that she may have chosen a religious life over marriage in part because of her sexuality, like many women before and after her. Was she a lesbian? And I'll get into the anachronism of using this term in a second. I've been reading Sor Juana's intense poetry dedicated to the Vicereine, María Luisa Manrique de Lara, Countess of Paredes, referred to as Lisi, and I can see why these poems could be read as sapphic. Let's get into it, and if you have no idea what I'm going on about, please watch the other video first and then come back. I have linked it below. Hello lovely history fans, I'm Dr. Julia Martins and I'm a historian. I am not an expert on Sor Juana, but I love learning about incredible women from history and she fits the bill perfectly. If you would like to support my work researching and sharing these stories, please subscribe to the channel and consider becoming a patron on Patreon for as little as £3 a month. It makes all the difference and I post more history content there like patrons only videos. Now, I've been learning so much about Sor Juana's fascinating life and work, and I have lots of questions, which force us to confront how we read historical intimacy and whether modern categories of identity can ever truly map onto the early modern past. To understand Sor Juana, I think we need to look past the saintly nun archetype and the modern lesbian label to try to understand the specific, complex reality of her relationships. As I mentioned in the other video, Sor Juana's life in the convent of San Jerónimo in Mexico City was defined by her relationship with the viceregal court. She was not a recluse in the desert, she was a celebrity. In fact, that was why she had left the Carmelite convent she had originally joined, because it prevented her from being a part of society outside of the convent. Her new convent was a salon visited by intellectuals, poets, and nobility. Among these visitors, two women stand out, the vicereines. The first, Leonor Carreto, arrived in New Spain with her husband, the viceroy, in 1664, and the couple stayed there until 1673. Leonor is usually depicted as a mother figure to the young Juana, though the 2016 Netflix series Juana Inés suggests that there was much more to it, with the vicereine developing homoerotic feelings towards Juana. Juana had served the vicereine and was beloved by her before embracing religious life. Leonor protected her and supported her, and Sor Juana dedicated poems to her, as it was common for writers to do with their patrons, and called her Laura in these poems. So far, nothing too unusual here, right? The second vicereine, María Luisa Manrique de Lara, arrived with her husband in 1680. She became something else entirely. For 8 years, until María Luisa returned to Spain in 1688, the two women maintained a profound bond. Like the previous vicereine, María Luisa was Sor Juana's patron and protector. She visited the convent frequently and they exchanged gifts and verses. Crucially, it was María Luisa who saved Sor Juana's work. When she left Mexico, she carried Sor Juana's manuscripts with her, publishing them in Madrid in 1689. Without this act of devotion, the 10th muse, Sor Juana, might have been forgotten. This patronage is historically very well documented. The emotional texture of their relationship, however, lives in the poetry. Sor Juana wrote dozens of poems for María Luisa, giving her the pastoral codename Lisi. It is possible that the choice of name came from the work of the Spanish poet Francisco Quevedo, who wrote Cantasola a Lisi, or Poems to Lisi, which were Baroque love sonnets, possibly inspired by a woman called Luisa. Remember, in Sor Juana's case, the vicereine was called María Luisa. Again, this is a hypothesis that is explored in the Netflix series. Thinking about Sor Juana's poems to Lisi, these are not formal verses to a superior, as you might expect. These poems are alive, they're desperate sometimes, and they occasionally hint at what feels like genuine physical longing. And yet, not everyone agrees. If we look at the primary sources, the ambiguity that some scholars claim exists often seems to evaporate. The language is unequivocally the language of love. Just listen to this sonnet. I adore Lisi, but I do not intend for Lisi to reciprocate my finesse. For if I judge her beauty as attainable, I offend both her decorum and my apprehension. Here, Sor Juana establishes a boundary. She adores Lisi, but she frames this love as impossible. She mentions decorum, social rules, as a barrier. This reads as a poem about adoration, about loving someone you can't have. Even more striking is the sonnet Esta tarde mi bien cuando te hablaba. This afternoon, my love, when I spoke to you. This poem is about a lover's quarrel, a moment of tears and misunderstanding. For in liquid humor, tears, you saw and touched my heart undone between your hands. Now, Lisi isn't explicitly mentioned here, but the poem is widely considered to be a part of and grouped together with the Lisi cycle of poems. In any case, this is a powerful image. The liquid humor probably refers to tears, and I love the tactile description, Lisi holding the poet's heart, undone heart in her hands, which feels incredibly intimate. It implies a physical proximity and an emotional vulnerability that transcends the standard flattery of a courtier to a vicereine. It sounds like a woman speaking to a lover who has just seen her cry. And the Netflix series, again, embraces this interpretation of the two of them having a love affair and just runs with it. Yet some people have argued that just because Sor Juana is writing this, that doesn't mean that this poetic persona is herself. She could be following the tradition of courtly love and creating characters. Who knows? In her romances, ballads, Sor Juana goes further, cataloging and praising Lisi's body. She praises her eyes, her lips, her neck. In one poem, she playfully regrets that she is a woman because it prevents her from courting Lisi as a man would. She writes that she can only offer the pure love of the soul, yet she spends stanza after stanza detailing the physical form she supposedly ignores. You can see where the polemic comes from, right? Okay, so you might be thinking, how is there a debate here? Clearly she's in love with the vicereine. As I mentioned, I'm not an expert on Sor Juana, so I'm just someone who recently fell in love with her writing. So let me tell you about the debate happening between scholars who study her, which can be summed up as soul versus body, or a debate between the Neoplatonists and the revisionists. The titan of Sor Juana's scholarship, Octavio Paz, talks about this in his monumental biography, Sor Juana, or The Traps of Faith. Paz argues against reading these poems as evidence of lesbian desire in the modern sense, and he frames this relationship through Neoplatonism. In this philosophical tradition, popular in the Renaissance and which Sor Juana would be familiar with, the highest form of love is the love of the soul, which is genderless. Physical love is secondary, even base. Therefore, when Sor Juana writes about loving Lisi, she's participating in a high-minded intellectual exercise. She is loving the divine spark within the vicereine. Paz also points to the conventions of courtly love. In this literary tradition, the poet, traditionally male, pledges eternal, unrequited service to a noble lady. Paz suggests Sor Juana adopted this masculine poetic voice. It was a literary game, a way to praise her patron using the available tools of the time. For Paz, to read this as lesbian is anachronistic and a projection of our modern views on sexuality, and not understanding a deep spiritual friendship. But, and here is the other side of the debate that allows for sapphic readings, modern feminist scholars, such as Electa Arenal and Amanda Powell, challenge Paz's dismissal. In their critical addition to The Answer, they argue that dismissing the eroticism as just a game erases the reality of Sor Juana's experience. They point out that the convent was a homosocial space. Women lived, worked, slept, and prayed exclusively with other women. In such an environment, women were the primary source of emotional sustenance. To say that Sor Juana didn't really mean it or was only thinking about the spiritual world when she wrote about her love for Lisi implies that women's expressions of affection are inherently less real than men's. Plus, the Neoplatonic defense often relies on the idea that because the nuns theoretically could not have sex due to grills, gods, and status, the desire did not exist. This is a logical fallacy, I think. Even if a nun wasn't having sex, desire exists independently of action, and this desire can be expressed through poetry. Also, some nuns did have sex. Scholar Emily L. Bergman also notes that Sor Juana constantly navigated the tension between the masculine voice of the poet and her own female identity. She rarely completely hides that she is a woman writing to a woman. She plays with the gender roles, sometimes calling herself a man in verse, other times explicitly lamenting her female state. This playfulness, which can also be seen in the plays that she wrote, suggests that she was fully aware of the transgressive nature of her words. Historians can only interpret the sources available and complement them with what we know about the context of the time. I think there are two traps that we need to avoid here. The first is the modern projection, assuming that Sor Juana would identify as a lesbian in the 21st century sense. The way people understood their bodies, sexualities, and identities was very different in the past, and we have to keep that in mind. Sor Juana would have viewed her world through theology and hierarchy, not sexual orientation the way we would. Having said that, I think the second trap that we need to avoid is a historical erasure. That is, assuming that just because she was a nun, her expressions of love were purely metaphorical. Historians working with queer history have to navigate these issues, and things can be particularly tricky with female homosexuality, which tended to be ignored or trivialized by male authorities, provided it did not involve usurpation of the phallus, using tools to simulate heterosexual sex. Some scholars argue that this invisibility paradoxically created a space of safety in which Sor Juana could write these things to María Luisa. Also, again, not all of her works were being written for publication. Many of them weren't. I imagine that her intimate, personal poetry wasn't. Someone as clever as Sor Juana, who knew how court life worked and how the Inquisition worked, would have understood all these codes and would be able to navigate them. Sor Juana used her gender and status to construct authority, but that's not all. Reading these poems, they give me the impression of a very intense passion. Whether that passion was ever physically consummated is probably impossible to know, and it's almost beside the point. When we read the Lisi poems today, I think we're witnessing a woman carving out emotional freedom within a cage. Sor Juana chose the convent to escape the servitude of marriage and to have the time and space to read and learn. She rejected the idea that she existed to serve a husband. In María Luisa, perhaps she found an equal, a woman of intellect and power who could understand her. The 1990 film about Sor Juana, called I, the Worst of All, Yo, la Peor de Todas, directed by María Luisa Bemberg, focuses a lot on that aspect of their relationship, by the way, and it's really interesting. I think that to call these poems sapphic is not an insult, nor is it necessarily an anachronism if we use the term to mean woman-centered eroticism. I think that as 21st century historians, we have to be very careful with how we interpret someone like Sor Juana. She was an incredibly interesting character and author, and I've only scratched the surface in these two videos. There's so much that could be said about her ideas about theology and so much more. Personally, though, what I love about reading her works the most, perhaps, is how she reminds us of how complex humans can be, how brave, how bold, how honest. But I'm curious to hear your thoughts in the comments, especially if you are someone who studies this period or if you are from Mexico. Also, if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And maybe, just maybe, join my Patreon community. Thank you and see you next time.